I never thought an emoji could shatter my entire world. But when I saw Jimmy's phone vibrate on the nightstand at 2:17 a.m., and that name lit up the screen, Terrence with a red heart emoji, glowing beneath it, my hands started trembling uncontrollably. The notification disappeared before I could process what I'd seen, leaving only the ghost of that heart burned into my retina. My fiancé lay beside me, breathing softly, his face peaceful in sleep. We'd gotten engaged 2 months ago, and every day since had felt like living inside a dream I never wanted to wake up from. We'd planned our future down to the smallest details: the house we'd buy, the dog we'd adopt, the life we'd build together. I stared at the ceiling, trying to rationalize what I'd just witnessed. Maybe it was a mistake. Maybe Terrence accidentally sent it to the wrong person. People do that all the time, right? But the timestamp kept flashing in my mind. Who sends business-related messages at 2 in the morning? And what kind of business partner uses heart emojis? Sleep became impossible. I lay there for hours, watching the clock tick forward, each minute feeling like an eternity. My mind raced through every interaction Jimmy had mentioned with this Terrence person. Wait, had he ever actually mentioned him before? I couldn't remember a single conversation where that name came up. When dawn finally broke through our bedroom curtains, I dragged myself out of bed and headed to the kitchen. I needed to do something normal, something routine. Making coffee felt like the only thing I could control in that moment. My hands moved mechanically, measuring grounds, pouring water, pressing buttons. "Good morning, babe." Jimmy's voice startled me. He wrapped his arms around my waist from behind and kissed my forehead. Everything about the gesture felt exactly like it always did: warm, loving, genuine. "You're up early. Couldn't sleep," I managed to say, keeping my voice steady. I turned to face him, searching his eyes for something, anything that might give him away. But all I saw was the same person I'd fallen in love with 3 years ago. He poured himself a cup of coffee and leaned against the counter, looking effortlessly handsome even with his hair sticking up in every direction. Bad dreams? Something like that. I took a sip of my coffee, using the moment to gather my thoughts. This was my opening. I could ask him directly, get this resolved right now. "So, I've been meaning to ask you, have a business partner named Terrence?" The pause was barely noticeable, just a fraction of a second, but I caught it. "Terrence? Yeah. He's not really a partner. More like a client I've been working with recently. Smart guy. Very forward-thinking. He's developing some innovative startup concepts." "Why do you ask?" I forced casualness into my tone. "Just curious. I noticed you've been taking a lot of late-night calls lately." Jimmy laughed, and the sound should have been reassuring. "Oh, that? Time zone differences. He's based in Europe right now, so our schedules don't always align perfectly. Sometimes the only time we can connect is late at night." He reached for my hand, intertwining our fingers. "Zane, you're not worried about work stuff, are you? You know my career sometimes demands weird hours." "No, of course not." The lie tasted bitter. "Just wanted to understand what's keeping you so busy." He squeezed my hand. "You're overthinking things, babe. Everything's fine." But everything wasn't fine. After Jimmy left for the bathroom, I found myself staring at his phone, still lying on the counter where he'd left it. My heart pounded as I reached for it. I knew his password. We'd shared them months ago as a gesture of trust and transparency. Back then, it had felt romantic. Now it felt like a test. My fingers trembled as I unlocked the screen. I navigated to his messages and found Terrence's contact immediately. The conversation thread was almost empty. Just that single heart emoji from last night, sitting there with no context, no preceding messages, no explanation. Everything else had been deleted. Why would someone delete an entire conversation but leave one emoji? Unless they'd been in a hurry. Unless they'd been in a hurry. Unless they'd been in a hurry. Unless they'd been interrupted before they could finish covering their tracks. I scrolled through his other messages, looking for any mention of Terrence elsewhere. Nothing. I checked his call log. Multiple calls to an unlisted number over the past 3 weeks. Many of them lasting over an hour. My stomach twisted into knots. "Find anything interesting?" Jimmy's voice made me jump. I hadn't heard him return. I fumbled with the phone, nearly dropping it. The battery was dying, so I thought I'd plug it in for you." He looked at me for a long moment, and I couldn't read his expression. Then he smiled. Thanks, babe. You're always taking care of me. The rest of the morning passed in a blur. Jimmy got ready for work, kissing me goodbye like he did every day. I watched him leave, and the moment the door closed behind him, I collapsed onto the couch. What was I supposed to do with this information? Confront him based on a single emoji and some deleted messages? That seemed crazy, but ignoring it felt impossible. I picked up my phone and almost called my best friend Noah, but stopped. What would I even say? That I was spiraling over a heart emoji? That I'd invaded my fiancé's privacy because of a gut feeling? Noah would tell me I was being paranoid, and maybe I was. Maybe I was destroying something beautiful over nothing. But that night when Jimmy came home, I watched him differently. Every gesture, every word, every smile, I analyzed it all, looking for cracks in the facade. He seemed normal, perfectly normal. We had dinner together, watched a movie, went to bed. He fell asleep with his arm around me, just like always. And just like the night before, his phone buzzed. This time it was 1:43 a.m. I carefully slipped out from under his arm and checked the screen. Another message from Terrence. No heart emoji this time. Just words, thinking about you. My breath caught in my throat. This wasn't business. This wasn't professional. This was something else entirely. I stood there in our bedroom, holding the phone that felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds, and realized that everything I'd built my life around might be built on lies. The worst part wasn't even the potential betrayal, it was the fact that the person sleeping peacefully in our bed might be someone I didn't know at all. I carefully placed the phone back on the nightstand and returned to bed, but sleep never came. I just lay there in the darkness, listening to Jimmy breathe, and wondered how many more secrets were hiding in that phone, waiting to destroy us both. The next week felt like living in a parallel universe where everything looked the same but nothing felt real anymore. Jimmy continued being the perfect fiancé, bringing me coffee in bed, leaving sweet notes on the bathroom mirror, planning our future wedding with enthusiasm that seemed genuine. But every gesture now carried weight I couldn't shake off. I became obsessed with his phone. Not in an obvious way, I was careful, strategic. I'd wait until he showered, claiming I needed to check the time, and I'd scan through his messages. Every single day, the conversation with Terrence remained suspiciously clean. Just professional exchanges about meetings and contracts. Sterile, calculated, too perfect. Meeting confirmed for Thursday at 3. One message read, "Contract revisions sent." Said another. They read like someone had carefully crafted them, knowing they'd be seen. The artificiality of it all made my skin crawl. During breakfast on Wednesday, I tried a different approach. "How's that project with Terrence coming along?" Jimmy looked up from his toast, seemingly unbothered. "Really well, actually. He's got incredible vision. We're discussing a potential long-term collaboration." "That's great." I stirred my coffee slowly. "You spend a lot of time talking to him." "Well, yeah. Big projects require constant communication." He studied my face. "You seem tense lately, Zane. Is everything okay at work?" The irony wasn't lost on me. He was concerned about my stress while potentially being the cause of it. Just some deadline pressure. Nothing serious. That night, after he fell asleep, I did something I swore I'd never do. I downloaded a data recovery application on my laptop. My hands shook as I connected his phone via cable, my conscience screaming that this was wrong, that I was violating his trust. But hadn't he already violated mine? The software took 40 minutes to scan. 40 minutes of sitting in our home office, listening to every creak in the house, terrified he'd wake up and catch me. When the results finally appeared on screen, I wished I'd never looked. Dozens of deleted messages populated the interface. I clicked on the conversation thread with Terrence, and my worst fears materialized before my eyes. The messages weren't just friendly, they were intimate, flirtatious, completely inappropriate for any professional relationship. "I can't stop thinking about our last call," Terrence had written 3 days ago. "Your laugh does something to me." Jimmy's response made my blood run cold. "You're dangerous for my peace of mind. But I wouldn't want it any other way." I scrolled further, my vision blurring with tears I refused to let fall. There were inside jokes, late-night conversations that had nothing to do with business, and then the message that made me actually gasp out loud. "What if Zane finds out about us?" Terrence had asked. "He won't. Jimmy had replied with casual confidence. He trusts me completely. Sometimes I think he trusts me too much. I slammed the laptop shut, afraid I might throw it against the wall. The man I'd agreed to marry, the person I'd chosen to spend my life with, was not only betraying me but mocking my trust while doing it. I sat there in the dark office, trembling with rage and heartbreak, unable to process the magnitude of what I'd discovered. For 3 days, I said nothing. I became an actor in my own life, playing the role of the unsuspecting fiancé while dying inside. I smiled when Jimmy kissed me. I laughed at his jokes. I made dinner and pretended everything was fine. But at night when he slept, I'd lie awake and replay those messages in my head, each word carving deeper wounds. On Saturday evening, Jimmy mentioned casually that he had plans the next day, meeting Terrence for brunch to discuss the quarterly projections. Should be back by early afternoon. Sounds productive, I said, my voice hollow to my own ears. You could come along if you want, he offered, though something in his tone suggested he hoped I'd decline. Though it might be boring, lots of number talk. No, that's okay, I have some errands to run anyway. The lie came easily now. I'd become good at lying, learned from the best. Sunday morning, I told Jimmy I was heading to the gym. Instead, I drove to the cafe he'd mentioned as their meeting spot. I parked across the street where I had a clear view through the large front windows but remained hidden. This was pathetic. I knew that I'd become the jealous partner who stalks and spies. But I needed to see them together. Needed to understand what I was really dealing with. Terrence arrived first. I recognized him from the profile picture I'd seen on Jimmy's phone. He was younger than I'd expected, probably mid-20s, with sharp features and an effortlessly stylish appearance. He carried himself with confidence that bordered on arrogance, scrolling through his phone while waiting. Then Jimmy walked in and I watched them greet each other. The hug lasted too long. Jimmy's hand lingered on Terrence's shoulder as they sat down. They leaned in close across the table, their conversation animated and clearly more than professional. When Terrence reached across and touched Jimmy's hand, my fiancé didn't tull away. He smiled that same smile he gave me every morning. I couldn't watch anymore. I started the car and drove aimlessly, ending up at a park on the other side of town. I sat on a bench for hours watching families play, couples walk by, people living normal lives while mine fell apart. My phone rang multiple times, Jimmy calling to say he was home. I let it go to voicemail. I wasn't ready to face him yet, wasn't ready to pretend everything was fine when nothing was. When I finally returned home that evening, Jimmy was cooking dinner. Hey, where've you been? I was getting worried. Jim then ran into an old friend. Lost track of time. Another lie to add to the collection. He seemed to accept this, wrapping me in a hug that felt like poison. Well, you're here now. I made your favorite pasta carbonara. We ate in relative silence, the weight of unspoken truths filling the space between us. I kept thinking about those deleted messages, about the way Terrence had touched his hand, about how easily Jimmy had said I trusted him too much. After dinner, I excused myself and locked myself in the bathroom. I stared at my reflection in the mirror, barely recognizing the person looking back. When had I become someone who snooped through phones and stalked from parked cars? This wasn't who I wanted to be, but Jimmy had turned me into this, had forced me into becoming paranoid and desperate. I needed to confront him. I knew that, but confrontation meant potential destruction, and I wasn't sure I was ready to detonate our entire relationship based on what I'd found. What if there was an explanation? What if I was misinterpreting everything? But deep down, I knew the truth. And the truth was going to destroy us both. Monday morning arrived with oppressive weight. I'd barely slept, my mind replaying the cafe scene on an endless loop. Jimmy's alarm went off at 6:30, and he rolled over to kiss my cheek before getting up. I kept my eyes closed, feigning sleep, unable to stomach any more false intimacy. After he left for work, I stayed in bed for another hour, staring at the ceiling and trying to formulate a plan. I couldn't continue like this. The constant surveillance, the mounting evidence, the slowly building rage that threatened to consume me entirely. Something had to give, and I knew it had to be me who made the first move. I decided to take a sick day from work. The thought of sitting in meetings and pretending to care about quarterly reports while my personal life imploded seemed impossible. Instead, I sat at my laptop and did something reckless. I created a new email account completely anonymous, untraceable. Then I found Terrence's professional email through his LinkedIn profile. My fingers hovered over the keyboard for 10 minutes before I finally typed, "I know what you're doing with Jimmy. Whatever this is, it needs to stop immediately." I hit send before I could second-guess myself. The message felt like throwing a grenade into our lives. But I was past the point of caring about collateral damage. The response came faster than I'd anticipated. Less than 30 minutes. "Who is this? If this is some kind of joke, it's not funny." I didn't reply. Let him wonder. Let him panic. Let him tell Jimmy that someone knew their secret. I wanted them both to feel a fraction of the anxiety that had been eating me alive for days. 2 hours later, my phone exploded with calls. "Jimmy." I let the first 3 go to voicemail. On the 4th call, I answered. "Zane, what the hell is going on?" His voice was sharp, angry in a way I'd rarely heard. "Did you contact Terrence?" My heart raced, but I kept my voice steady. "I don't know what you're talking about. Don't play games with me." He just forwarded me a threatening email from an anonymous account. "You're the only person who even knows about him. What did you do?" "Threatening?" "I asked someone to stay away from my fiancé." "How is that threatening?" The words came out before I could stop them. Silence. Then, quietly, dangerously, "You've been monitoring my communications. You've been deleting messages." I shot back. "What did you expect me to do? Just ignore the late-night texts and mysterious phone calls? This is insane. You're acting paranoid and unstable. Terrence is a colleague. Nothing more. Your jealousy is completely unfounded and frankly embarrassing." The gaslighting made something snap inside me. I saw the deleted messages. "Jimmy." I recovered them. "I know exactly what's been happening between you two." Another pause, longer this time. When he spoke again, his voice had changed. Controlled, calculating. "You invaded my privacy. You hacked my phone. You betrayed our relationship. You made me into someone who felt they had no choice but to investigate because you couldn't be honest. We need to talk about this in person. I'm coming home. Don't bother. I won't be here." I hung up before he could respond. I grabbed my keys and left, driving to Noah's apartment across town. My best friend took one look at my face and pulled me inside without questions. I collapsed on his couch and finally let myself break down, telling him everything: the emoji, the deleted messages, the surveillance, the confrontation. Noah listened without interruption, his expression growing darker as the story unfolded. When I finished, he said simply, "You need to leave him." "It's not that simple. We're engaged. We have a lease together. Our lives are completely intertwined. None of that matters if he's cheating on you. And even if nothing physical happened, emotional infidelity is still infidelity. He's been lying to you, gaslighting you, making you question your own instincts. That's not love, Zane. That's manipulation." I knew he was right, but knowing and accepting are different things entirely. My phone wouldn't stop buzzing. Jimmy had sent approximately 30 texts, ranging from angry to apologetic to pleading. I turned it off completely, unable to deal with the onslaught. I stayed at Noah's for 2 days. 2 days of avoiding reality, of trying to process the fact that my entire future had been built on sand. Noah gave me space, but also made sure I ate, slept, and didn't completely fall apart. On Wednesday evening, Jimmy sent an email to my work account, the only way left to reach me. The subject line read, "Please let me explain." Against my better judgment, I opened it. The message was long, rambling, filled with justifications and explanations that all sounded hollow. He claimed Terrence was just a friend who got too comfortable. He insisted nothing physical had happened. He said I'd misinterpreted the messages, taken things out of context. He wanted to meet to talk things through properly. The email ended with, "I love you, Zane. Please don't throw away what we have over a misunderstanding." A misunderstanding. That's what he was calling it. Years of building trust, months of planning our future, all reduced to a misunderstanding that was somehow my fault for discovering. I showed the email to Noah. He read it and scoffed. Classic deflection. He's trying to make you feel guilty for catching him. What if he's telling the truth? What if nothing actually happened and I'm destroying our relationship over suspicion? Then why lie? Why delete messages? Why get so defensive? Innocent people don't behave like this, Zane. You know that. I did know that. But part of me still wanted to believe in the fantasy we'd created together. The life we'd planned seemed so real, so tangible. Walking away from it felt like admitting defeat, like accepting that I'd been foolish enough to trust someone who didn't deserve it. That night, I finally turned my phone back on. Among the flood of messages, one stood out. A text from an unknown number. "This is Terrence. We need to talk. What Jimmy told you isn't the whole truth." My hands started shaking again. What could possibly be worse than what I already knew? What truth could be more devastating than the betrayal I'd already uncovered? I stared at the message for a long time, weighing my options. I could ignore it, block the number, try to move forward without any additional information. Or I could respond, open another door that might lead to even more pain. In the end, curiosity won. I typed back, "Fine. When and where?" His response was immediate. "Tomorrow, noon. The coffee shop on Hamilton Street. Come alone." I agreed, knowing I was probably making another terrible decision in a long line of them. But I needed to know the complete truth, no matter how much it hurt. I'd come this far. There was no point in stopping now. Whatever Terrence had to tell me, I'd face it head on. And then I'd finally decide what to do about the ruins of my engagement. Thursday noon arrived with suffocating anxiety. I sat in the coffee shop on Hamilton Street 30 minutes early, occupying a corner table where I could watch the entrance. My coffee grew cold as I rehearsed possible conversations in my head, each scenario more devastating than the last. Terrence walked in at exactly 12 o'clock. He spotted me immediately and approached with measured confidence. Up close he was even more striking, the kind of person who commanded attention without trying. He sat down across from me without asking permission. "Thank you for meeting me," he said, his voice lower than I'd expected. "I assume you have questions." "Start with the truth," I replied, keeping my tone neutral despite the storm raging inside me. "What exactly is your relationship with my fiancé?" He ordered a black coffee from a passing server before answering. "Jimmy and I met 6 months ago at a networking event in Boston. We connected professionally at first. I was impressed by his business acumen and he found my ideas intriguing. We exchanged contact information and started collaborating on a project." "That sounds perfectly innocent. So why are we here?" Terrence leaned back, studying me carefully. "Because about 3 months ago, things shifted. He started calling more frequently, not always about work. Our conversations became personal. He'd tell me about his frustrations, his dreams, his fears, and I listened because I genuinely enjoyed talking to him." My jaw tightened. "Did you sleep with him?" "No." His answer was immediate and firm. "Nothing physical ever happened between us. But I'd be lying if I said there wasn't an emotional component developing. The flirtation was real, even if we never acted on it." "So you admit you were pursuing someone you knew was engaged?" I admit I didn't discourage him when I should have. He met my eyes directly. "But here's what Jimmy didn't tell you. I ended things 2 weeks ago. I told him we needed to maintain professional boundaries, because what was happening wasn't fair to you." That's when he started panicking. The revelation hit me like cold water. "What do you mean panicking?" "He became obsessive about keeping our friendship intact. He said you wouldn't understand, that you'd misinterpret everything. He started deleting messages to hide the evidence of our conversations. Not because we were having an affair, but because he was afraid you'd see how emotionally dependent he'd become on our connection." I gripped my coffee cup hard enough that my knuckles turned white. "The trip? The anniversary surprise he claims you were helping plan?" Terrence shook his head slowly. "That's a lie. There was a trip discussed, but it wasn't for your anniversary. Jimmy suggested we take a weekend to finalize our business proposal in a neutral location. When I declined and told him it was inappropriate, he became defensive. That's actually what triggered our final conversation where I established boundaries." "Why are you telling me this? What do you gain from destroying my relationship?" "I'm not trying to destroy anything," he said quietly. "I'm trying to give you information Jimmy won't provide. You deserve to know that while nothing physical occurred, he was emotionally investing in someone else. That's a betrayal too, even if society doesn't always recognize it as such." We sat in silence for several minutes. The coffee shop buzzed with lunchtime activity around us, people living normal lives while mine continued crumbling. "The heart emoji," I finally said. "Why did you send it?" He looked genuinely confused. I never sent a heart emoji. Our communication has been strictly professional for weeks now. If you saw one, either he sent it to himself from my contact to manipulate the situation, or someone else has access to his phone. That possibility hadn't occurred to me. Could Jimmy have fabricated evidence to test my reaction? To gauge how much I trusted him, the manipulation would be next level. But given everything else, I couldn't rule it out. What do you want from me? I asked. Nothing. I wanted you to know the complete picture so you can make an informed decision about your future. Jimmy is charismatic and convincing, and he'll probably paint me as the villain who tried to seduce him. But the reality is more complicated than that. He sought emotional intimacy outside your relationship, and when I refused to continue providing it, he spiraled. Terrence stood, leaving cash on the table for his untouched coffee. For what it's worth, he does talk about you constantly. Maybe he loves you in his way, but his way includes seeking validation from others when he feels insecure. That's something you need to know before you commit your life to him. He left without another word, and I remained frozen in my seat, processing everything. The story made terrible sense. Jimmy had always struggled with self-doubt, despite his confident exterior. He needed constant reassurance, continuous validation. I provided it happily, but maybe it was never enough. My phone buzzed. A text from Jimmy. Can we please talk? I miss you terribly. I stared at the message, wondering who the person on the other end really was. Did I know him at all? Had I ever? Or had I fallen in love with a carefully constructed version he presented to the world while the real Jimmy remained hidden behind walls? I'd never noticed. I typed back, "Meet me at the apartment in 2 hours." His response was instant. "I'll be there. Thank you for giving me this chance." But I wasn't giving him a chance. I was giving myself one, a chance to confront him with Terrence's version of events. To watch his face as I dismantled his carefully constructed narrative. To finally see the truth without the filter of my own desperate hope that everything could somehow be okay. I paid for my coffee and walked to my car, feeling strangely calm. The panic and anxiety of the past weeks had been replaced by cold clarity. Whatever happened in the next few hours would determine the trajectory of my entire future. Either Jimmy would provide explanations that made sense and we'd find a way forward, or I'd walk away from the relationship I built my life around. As I drove back to our apartment, I realized something important. I was finally ready for either outcome. The fear of losing him had controlled me for too long, made me compromise my own dignity and self-respect. Whatever truth emerged from our upcoming conversation, I'd face it standing tall rather than cowering in fear of abandonment. The apartment felt foreign when I entered, like a space that belonged to strangers rather than us. I sat on the couch where we'd spent countless evenings watching movies and planning our future, and I waited for the man I thought I knew to arrive and prove whether that person ever really existed at all. Jimmy arrived exactly on time, looking exhausted and anxious. He'd clearly lost weight over the past week, his clothes hanging looser than they should. Dark circles shadowed his eyes, and his usually perfect hair was disheveled. Part of me wanted to comfort him immediately, but I forced myself to remain still. "Thank you for agreeing to see me," he said, hovering near the doorway like he wasn't sure he was allowed to enter his own home. "Sit down." My voice came out harder than intended. "We need to have a real conversation. No more lies, no more manipulation, no more carefully edited versions of the truth." He sank into the armchair across from me, and I noticed his hands were shaking. "I know I've hurt you. I know I haven't been completely honest. But I swear to you nothing happened with Terrence. I met with him today." The color drained from Jimmy's face. "You what?" He reached out to me. "We had coffee and he told me his version of events. Now I want to hear yours, and it better be the complete truth this time, because I'm done with partial explanations and convenient omissions." Jimmy ran his hands through his hair, a nervous gesture I'd seen 1,000 times. "What did he tell you? That you became emotionally dependent on him? That you sought intimate conversations outside our relationship? That when he tried to establish boundaries, you panicked and started covering your tracks? That the anniversary trip was fiction you invented to justify inappropriate planning?" I kept my voice steady, watching his reactions. "Your turn. Tell me what really happened." He was quiet for a long moment, and I could see him calculating, trying to decide how much truth to reveal. Finally, he exhaled slowly. You're right. About most of it. I did become too close to him. The conversations were inappropriate even if we never crossed any physical lines. Why? The single word contained months of confusion and pain. What was I not giving you that you needed from him? It wasn't about you being inadequate, he said quickly. It was about me being broken. I've always struggled with feeling like I'm not enough, not smart enough, not successful enough, not interesting enough. You love me unconditionally and somehow that makes it worse. Because I don't understand how you could love someone as flawed as me. So you sought validation from a stranger? Terrence didn't know all my failures and weaknesses. With him, I could pretend to be someone more impressive. Our conversations were surface level enough that I could maintain that illusion. It was escapism and it was wrong. And I'm so sorry. I absorbed this, recognizing the pattern I'd seen throughout our relationship. His constant need for praise, his fishing for compliments, his anxiety when I wasn't immediately available. You created an emotional affair because you can't accept my love as real. When you say it like that, it sounds incredibly stupid. It is incredibly stupid, Jimmy. But it's also heartbreaking because it means nothing I do will ever be enough. You'll always need external validation, and eventually you'll seek it from someone else again. He moved to kneel in front of me, taking my hands in his. That's not true. This situation has shown me how destructive that pattern is. I nearly lost you, the only person who's ever truly seen me and loved me anyway. I don't want to be that person anymore. Wanting to change and actually changing are completely different things. I pulled my hands away, and you still haven't explained the deleted messages, the lies, the gaslighting when I started asking questions. I panicked, he admitted. When Terrence cut me off, I felt rejected and foolish. I realized how much I'd risked for something that was never even real. I started deleting evidence because I was ashamed, not because I was hiding an affair. Then when you confronted me, instead of being honest, I deflected and made you feel crazy for having valid concerns. What about the heart emoji? Terrence says he never sent it. Jimmy looked away and I knew. You sent it to yourself from his contact, didn't you? His silence was confirmation. Why would you do that? I felt sick. Why manufacture evidence of betrayal? I don't know, he whispered. I think some part of me wanted to get caught. I wanted you to confront me so I'd be forced to deal with what I'd been doing instead of continuing to spiral. It's twisted and manipulative, and I don't have a good explanation except that I was drowning and didn't know how to ask for help. I stood up, needing distance. This was worse than infidelity somehow. This calculated psychological manipulation. This self-sabotage that pulled me into his dysfunction. You used me in your personal crisis. You made me doubt my own sanity because you couldn't handle your emotions like an adult. I know, you have every right to hate me. I don't hate you, I said, surprised to find it was true. But I don't know if I can trust you again. And without trust, what do we have? He stood as well, and I saw genuine desperation in his eyes. A chance to rebuild something stronger. A relationship based on honesty instead of fantasy. I'll do whatever it takes: therapy, couples counseling, complete transparency with my phone and communications. I'll prove to you that I can be worthy of your trust. This isn't about being worthy. It's about being willing to do the hard work of examining why you behave this way and actively changing those patterns. That takes years, Jimmy, and I don't know if I have years of patience left after what you've put me through. Then give me months. Give me weeks. Just don't walk away yet. Tears were streaming down his face now. I love you more than I've ever loved anyone, and I know I showed it in the worst possible way, but please let me try to fix this. I looked at him, really looked at him, and saw someone genuinely terrified of losing what we had. But I also saw someone who'd hurt me deliberately, even if the motivation was complicated. Could people really change their fundamental patterns? Could I invest more time and emotion into someone who might repeat these behaviors the moment things got difficult again? I need time, I finally said. Time away from you to figure out what I actually want versus what I've convinced myself I should want. You need to find a therapist and actually address these issues. Not for me, but for yourself. How much time? I don't know. However long it takes for me to know whether this relationship is worth saving or if I'm just clinging to what I thought we had rather than accepting what we actually are. He nodded, devastated but understanding. Can I at least stay in touch? Send you updates on therapy, show you I'm serious about changing. 1 email per week. I conceded. Nothing manipulative, nothing designed to guilt me into coming back. Just honest updates on your progress. Thank you. He breathed. That's more than I deserve. He was right about that. 6 weeks passed. 6 weeks of living with Noah, of individual therapy sessions where I examined my own patterns and choices, of slowly rebuilding my sense of self apart from the relationship I'd defined myself by for so long. True to his word, Jimmy sent weekly emails. They were raw and honest in ways his in-person communication had never been. He detailed his therapy sessions, the painful realizations about his childhood trauma and attachment issues, the concrete steps he was taking to develop healthier coping mechanisms. He never once pressured me to respond or return. He simply showed me his progress, leaving the decision entirely in my hands. I read each email multiple times, analyzing them for manipulation or performance. But they felt genuine, the vulnerability too real, the admissions too unflattering to be calculated for effect. He was doing the work, actually changing, or at least beginning the long process of change. My own therapist asked me during our 5th session what I actually wanted. Forget what you think you should want, or what would make a good story, or what your friends advise. What does your gut tell you? I thought about it for a long time before answering. I want to believe people can change. I want to believe that recognizing destructive patterns is the first step toward breaking them. But I'm also terrified of being foolish, of investing more time into something that's fundamentally broken. Those aren't mutually exclusive positions, she pointed out. You can believe in someone's capacity for growth, while also protecting yourself with appropriate boundaries. The question is whether you want to be part of his healing journey or if you need to prioritize your own separate healing. That night, I finally responded to one of his emails. Your progress sounds real. I'm proud of you for doing this work, regardless of whether we get back together. I'm still not ready to make any decisions about us. His response came within an hour. Thank you for acknowledging my efforts. Take all the time you need. My growth isn't conditional on our relationship status. I'm learning to fix myself for myself. That answer meant more to me than any dramatic declaration of love would have. He was finally taking responsibility for his own emotional health, rather than outsourcing it to others. Another month passed. I went on a few casual dates, testing what it felt like to be single again. The men were nice enough, but I found myself comparing every conversation to what Jimmy and I had at our best. The easy banter, the shared humor, the comfortable silence. None of these strangers came close, but maybe that wasn't fair. Maybe I was romanticizing what we'd had while minimizing the very real problems. Then one evening, I ran into Terrence at a bookstore. He seemed surprised but not uncomfortable seeing me. How are you managing? Better, I said honestly. Taking things day by day. Thanks for being honest with me, by the way. You didn't have to tell me everything. I felt responsible for my part in the mess, he replied. I should have shut down the inappropriate dynamic much earlier. I let my ego enjoy the attention instead of considering the consequences. We're all learning, I guess. He smiled slightly. For what it's worth, Jimmy checked in with me a few weeks ago. Apologized for putting me in an uncomfortable position and thanked me for being straight with you. It seemed genuine. After he left, I sat in the bookstore cafe and made a list in my journal. 2 columns labeled reasons to try again and reasons to move on. The columns ended up nearly equal in length, which told me I still hadn't found clarity. That weekend, I finally agreed to meet Jimmy for coffee. Neutral territory, no pressure, just 2 people having a conversation. He arrived looking healthier than when I'd last seen him. More color in his face, less weight on his shoulders. You look good, I said, and meant it. Therapy is brutal but effective, he replied with a slight smile. I've learned more about myself in 3 months than in my entire previous life. Most of it isn't pretty, but at least I understand why I do the things I do now. We talked for 2 hours. Not about us, not about the future, just about our separate journeys. He told me about the cognitive behavioral techniques he was learning, the medication his psychiatrist had prescribed for anxiety, the support group for people with attachment disorders. I told him about my own therapy revelations, the patterns I'd recognized in how I chose partners, the ways I'd sometimes enabled unhealthy dynamics by being too accommodating. When we finally addressed the elephant in the room, it was Jimmy who brought it up. I don't know if we can fix what broke between us, but I hope we can at least reach a place of mutual understanding and forgiveness. Even if we don't end up together. His words surprised me. You're not going to fight for us? I fought in all the wrong ways before: manipulation, lies, creating drama to force confrontation. Real love doesn't fight dirty. It respects boundaries and accepts that sometimes caring about someone means letting them go if that's what they need. I felt tears forming. When did you become so wise? About 24 therapy sessions ago, he said with a self-deprecating laugh. Look, Zane. I meant everything I said about wanting to rebuild with you. But I also recognize that wanting something doesn't mean I deserve it. You get to decide what's best for your life, and I'll respect whatever conclusion you reach. We parted with a hug that felt different from before. Less desperate, more grounded. As I drove home, I realized something important had shifted. The panic and urgency that had characterized our relationship crisis had transformed into something calmer, more mature. I spent another week in reflection before I knew what I wanted. I called Jimmy and asked if he wanted to try again, slowly, with clear boundaries and continued individual therapy for both of us. Not because I'd forgiven everything immediately, but because I believed in his genuine effort to change and thought we might build something healthier from the ruins of what we'd had. Are you sure? He asked, and I could hear both hope and fear in his voice. I'm sure I want to try. That's all I can promise right now. That's more than enough. We started over. First dates, relearning each other. Building trust through consistent action rather than empty promises. Some days were harder than others. Sometimes old patterns threatened to resurface, and we had to actively choose different responses. But slowly, carefully, we created something new. Not the fantasy relationship I'd once imagined, but something more real, built on honesty, mutual growth, and the hard-won understanding that love requires constant work and the courage to face uncomfortable truths. Whether it would last forever, I couldn't say, but for now it was enough to take it one day at a time, together.